bigotry just hours after the commander-in-chief sent the American people a different message. Let's bring in our Pentagon correspondent, Barbara Starr. Barbara, this is a rather unusual move by members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
That's right, Wolf. The Joint Chiefs are some of the nation's top military personnel. They say always they do not get involved in politics. They do not challenge the President of the United States, but they are stepping into this national conversation. All of the chiefs of the U.S. military branches have taken the extraordinarily rare step of publicly weighing in on the violence in Charlottesville.
Now, here's the thing.
Now, a political crisis for President Trump. Beginning just hours after the demonstrations turned deadly, the chief of naval operations first tweeted, "Events in Charlottesville unacceptable and mustn't be tolerated. U.S. Navy forever stands against intolerance and hatred." An aide says Richardson tweeted because Charlottesville was a significant event that caught the country's attention.
I know John Richardson very well. He was not being political. He was just very quickly saying, Navy, these are our standards. This is what we will live by.
Defense Secretary James Maddow offering a single comment.
I would just tell you, I was saddened by it, very saddened by what I saw.
Aides are adamant the military is not challenging President Trump, but Richardson and the other chiefs making clear violence and bigotry is not tolerated in the ranks. At least 2 former military members now tied to extremist groups. James Field served in the Army for just a few months. He is charged with second-degree murder after he rammed his car into a crowd of counter-protesters, killing Heather Heyer. Field's involvement led General Mark Milley, head of the Army, to tweet, "The Army doesn't tolerate racism, extremism, or hatred in our ranks. It's against our values and everything we've stood for since 1775. And following reports that Dylan Harper, who left the Marine Corps in January, leads a white supremacist group called Vanguard America, Marine Corps Commandant General Robert Neller tweeted, "No place for racial hatred or extremism in U.S. Marine Corps. Our core values of honor, courage, and commitment frame the way Marines live and act." They were followed by the heads of the Air Force and National Guard tweeting they stand with their fellow chiefs, condemning racism, extremism, and hatred.
This national conversation is about American values, what we hold dear, what we expect our servicemen and women to defend and to fight for.
It may not be about politics, but this very rare move by the Joint Chiefs is getting a lot of attention. Wolf?
Certainly is. Barbara Starr at the Pentagon, thank you very much. I want to get some more perspective on this very rare move by the Joint Chiefs. We're joined by our Chief National Security Correspondent, Jim Sciutto, and our CNN military and diplomatic analyst, retired Rear Admiral John Kirby. It's almost an ironclad rule that the military leadership does not get involved in politics, but this situation is different.
No question. Listen, they have been caveating these public statements by saying, listen, this is just meant for the Corps. This is not directly contradicting the president. But let's be frank here. The 4 chiefs who don't like to make statements really at all tied to politics in quick succession, starting on Saturday with the Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral John Richardson, made very public statements while not mentioning the president that directly contradicted the president's meaning and his words. I spoke to the staff of the Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral John Richardson, and they said to me specifically that that message was meant not just for naval service members, but for the public as well, because he saw what was happening there, and he wanted to go on the record to say that. Now, the military chiefs have to say, and understandably, that this was not meant to contradict the commander-in-chief. But let's be frank, the 4 of them had a unified voice here that gave a contradictory message, frankly, to the president.
John Kirby, you know these chiefs. You've worked closely with them. Why do you think they felt compelled at this moment in our history to join this conversation?
I think what happened was so egregious and so terrible and unfolding on national television that they couldn't ignore this. This is about leadership. General Hertling in that piece with Barbara's right. This is about core values. This is about what you sign up for when you sign up to defend this country in uniform. And I feel it was really important for them, I believe, to make sure they communicated not just to the American people, but to potential recruits, to moms and dads that are thinking about putting their sons and daughters, off on that bus to boot camp, that this is who we are, and just as importantly, Wolf, this is not who we are.
You know, the former CIA director, John Brennan, he wrote to me last night after the show. Just let me tell you a couple of things he said. He said, Mr. Trump's words and the beliefs they reflect are a national disgrace, and all Americans of conscience need to repudiate his ugly and dangerous comments. If allowed to continue along this senseless path, Mr. Trump will do lasting harm to American society and to our standing in the world. By his words and his actions, Mr. Trump is putting our national security and our collective futures at grave risk.
Well, this is the meaning of Nazism. I don't have to tell you with your own family history. This is the meaning and the legacy of Nazism. 6 million deaths. That was what happened. That's what the Nazis carried out. The president either doesn't know that history or doesn't respect it based on his public comments. That's the truth of it. And keep in mind, it's not the first time the president has used that word Nazi. Remember, he used it to describe his own intelligence community, obviously something that, well, unusual for a commander-in-chief to do, but one that there really is no comparison between the U.S. intelligence community and what the Nazis carried out. So either it is willful ignorance of the legacy of Nazism or something else. But his words do not reflect the actual legacy.
When he was criticizing the U.S. intelligence community, he didn't like the leaks. He said, in a tweet, he said, what is this, Nazi Germany?
Yeah, I know. It's incredible, the hypocrisy here at play. But I associate myself with Director Brennan's comment. I think we are reaching a very dangerous point here. And there are real national security crises that need the president to step up. And he's got to have the support of his leadership, which means he has to be a more inclusive leader than he has been to date.
And you think people all over the world, countries all over the world, friends and adversaries, they're watching this obviously very closely.
Absolutely they are, every single day. And I can tell you many of them that I've spoken to out there, they're disconcerted. They're worried about where American leadership is going in the world.
He's got to do something in the next few days to try to fix this. Let's see what he does, guys. Thanks very, very much. An important moment in the country's history right now. Finally, tonight, 12-ounce.
Most trusted name in news.
Breaking news sources telling CNN President Trump remains defiant despite the backlash over his response to the racist violence in Charlottesville, Virginia, and the president's off-the-rails news conference. One person who has been to Trump Tower says the president is plunging forward, quote, without regret. Let's bring in our specialists to assess these developments. Chris Cillizza, you wrote an article for CNN.com which makes a very provocative assertion. Quote, Donald Trump's insistence Tuesday that both sides were responsible for the violent protests in Charlottesville, Virginia, has turned what was a fumbling presidency into what now appears to be one on the verge of total collapse.
Yeah, so it is provocative, but I would say that what you had from January 20th until this past weekend is a president and a White House that was committing a huge number of political errors, whether it was miscalculating the opposition to the health care repeal and replace in the Senate, whether it was the massive amounts of turnover he's had at high levels, was it the president himself, things he says that caused self-inflicted wounds. What I think you have now, post-Charlottesville, and what Donald Trump said about it Saturday, Monday, and Tuesday, is a White House and a president who has lost the sort of any sense of the moral high ground that being president gives you. Saying that this is a both sides issue forfeits your sort of moral leadership, which in moments like this is what people look to a president, Republican president, Democratic president, for. Barack Obama's speech in Charleston after the shooting at the church. George W. Bush on the pile after September 11th. There are moments in presidencies in which it is not Republican and Democrat. It is, you are appeal to our better angels. You are the best of us, and you lead us and assure us things are going to be better. When you abdicate that responsibility, and you don't only abdicate it, you essentially say, no, this is just the same old politics. I think you are in a different place than simply saying, wow, I'm surprised he didn't get health care repeal through.
I also think that you're not able to get it back. So let's assume, let's say Donald Trump were to come to his senses in some way and address the country and address this forthrightly and correctly in a way that the country could actually rally around and find some solace in. In some alternate universe, let's say that that were to happen, I still think he would have a hard time sort of leading the country to a place of healing because there would be so much distrust now. So it's not just like you lose the moral authority. It is very, very difficult to get it back in any way. And Wolf, what we hear today out of Trump Tower, that there are no regrets, that of course is not surprising about Donald Trump. The guy doesn't regret anything, right? So that is not terribly surprising. But it now, even more so, demands that the Republican leadership on Capitol Hill and around the country, those that have not yet stepped up to actually address the president and take the president on here, the fact that he has no regrets over it, to me, makes the burden even bigger on them for them to step up and speak to this.
Yeah, I mean, to Chris and David's point, I talked to a Republican a couple hours ago who's very plugged in, said he believes that Trump has done irreparable damage to the party and to his presidency just in the last 4 days, just in his handling of this situation. It's put the party into a sense of chaos about what the future holds for them and for their agenda. Part of that is because Trump has already been perceived as being quite disconnected from any sort of legislative agenda. And people on the Hill are kind of thinking, okay, so there can't be a day that goes by in which there isn't some sort of self-immolation happening from the White House. And it makes it seem as if it is impossible to get any big things done. People on the Hill believe that it is not possible to do really big things without the backing of a competent White House. Beyond, including the moral issues at hand here, I think there are some basic competency issues that this entire episode really underscores that have left a lot of Republicans very, very worried.
I think it's just very quickly, I think it's hard to just suddenly say, okay, here we go, tax reform.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, yes, they will try to do that, but
but they know they cannot.
For an administration and a president who is
Hold
so
on, one at a
concerned-
time. Go ahead, Don.
For an administration and a president who's so concerned about the credibility of his administration, the legitimacy of his presidency, no one has done more to undermine the President of the United States than the President of the United States. Anytime you have Robert E. Lee's grandson, Robert E. Lee V, issuing a statement stronger than the President of the United States, you know something is wrong. His grandson released a statement today, Wolf, saying, General Lee's life was about duty, honor, and country. And at the end of the Civil War, he implored the nation to come together to heal our wounds and to move forward to become a more unified nation. He would never have tolerated the hateful words and violent actions of white supremacists, the KKK, and neo-Nazis. All day long on this network, I've been hearing one person after the other say, this president is on an island. The question is, when is his own party going to hold him to account and vote him off the island so that we can have some semblance of credibility in this country? That is a question right now. This president, as Carl Bernstein has been saying, his fitness to hold the office of the presidency.
Respectfully, I think you're all wrong. I think...
Of course you do. You're a contrarian.
No, I'm not just a contrarian. Who won this election? Donald Trump won this election by being Donald Trump, who was precisely who was the president.
Jeffrey's actions are right because he won the election.
We're not talking about right and wrong here.
Yes, we are. Yes, we are. We're talking about right and wrong. We're talking about decency.
No, we're talking about whether you can function as president of the United States. And he can certainly function because the Republican Party is not going to abandon him. Mitch McConnell said he was upset. You know, I'm upset when I can't find a good parking place. I mean, it is the mildest kind of rebuke. Do you think Mitch McConnell is not going to fight for tax reform now? Do you think that the Republican Party is going to stop trying to disenfranchise African Americans like it's doing all over the country because Donald Trump said something bad? This is what the Republican Party stands for now, and Donald Trump won, and I don't think his support is going to change one bit because of this.
His support has already changed. His support has already changed over the course of the 7 months of his presidency. His support has changed from what he arrived in office with on January 20th to the 34% he's at now. I think it's actually changed quite a bit.
I think his support has changed. If you look at the CEOs today who have backed away from him, I think the recrimination from the Republican Party has been tepid. at best, because they have said, okay, we must stand up against racism. Very few of them have actually used the president's name. But I think as you get further along in this, I think they will be emboldened. They might be emboldened to do that. Hopefully they will be emboldened to do that, not necessarily to drive this president from office, but to hold him to account.
We would all like
though,
to
Jeff,
believe.
Jeff, just very quickly, I do think you have to believe, if you look at history, you have to believe in the possible evolution of the parties. I don't think you can just assume that because the Republican Party, and you are right, you are absolutely right, the Republican Party, I counted 9 times, I'm sure there are more, but 9 times in the election where they insisted that they were finally done with Donald Trump, disavow, not campaigning with him, and yet they still push his agenda. But I do think that you have to hold the possibility, because history suggests it exists, that moments like this can have an effect. That just because the way things have been is not necessarily the way things will be. And I'm not saying it's going to change tomorrow, but I do think if you are a Republican elected official, you look at what has happened over the last 4 or 5 days with Donald Trump, and I think it gives you more than just pause. And I'm not saying it's all of them. And you're right, politically speaking,
I think Jeffrey's right. I think he's right. I think that, I know the Republican Party is trafficked in racism for a long time and for keeping people apart. But this, Chris, you're right as well. Over the last 5 days has shown a spotlight on that, and I think, if anything, in some odd way, this may bring about change, or at least start to bring about change within the party.
I would like to live.
The question is,
I was going to point out 19 Republicans have specifically criticized. We have them up on the screen right now. They've denounced the president by name.
What are the options available to Republicans at this point? So, is the expectation that they might pressure him to resign? Republicans are quick to remind you this is not a president who takes constructive or criticism or any kind of criticism well. So I think most of them expect that's a dead end. There are constitutional ways of dealing with a president that people don't like or don't want to be associated with. I think that's pretty much off the table. It would be hard to see a Republican Congress going there. And otherwise, there's the option of them just really pushing back vocally, which some of them have, and distancing themselves practically from Trump. The problem is the Republican Party's agenda and Donald Trump's agenda are actually very, very similar. They are not that different. So what it's going to look like when they distance themselves from Trump might be exactly what it looks like now.
That has very little to do with the legislative agenda. I think it has very little to do. I understand that there may be implications for that. But what we're talking about in this moment, though, to get back to where we started, we're talking about a leader who's abdicated this responsibility as leader. The one thing we all know, and I think we can all agree on, politics abhors a vacuum. And so who now is going to step in? Because he said, made it clear, this is not a role that he is going to play. So who is going to step into this leadership?
The question is beyond words, what else is there?
I would love to live in a country where being a racist was bad politics. But you know what? We may not live in that country. And that's how Donald Trump won the election. That's what he's counting on now. And this idea that the country and the party is going to change from November, 7 months ago, or now 7 months since he's been president, 9 months since the election, I think is a fantasy. I mean, there has been no real rebellion. Look at his White House staff. Look at the number of resignations. Look at the press conference yesterday where you had an Asian American, Elaine Chao, and 2 Jewish Americans, Gary Cohn and Steve Mnuchin, used as pathetic props as he embraces or justifies Nazis and the KKK. And where are their, Gary Cohn very courageously leaks out that he's distressed. Has he said a word publicly? Have any of these people said a word publicly? Has anyone quit? No, because this is the president that they elected.
But Jeffrey,
and he's not changing.
Don, I want to read to you. Okay. This is a tweet. Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut is a Democrat, reacting to some of the big CEOs that quit the consuls that the president has put forward. Senator Murphy tweeted this: White House staff have effectively been folded into the white supremacy propaganda operation. Your choice, stay or go.
That was the point. That is the point that I was going to make. I think there's a difference between the lawmakers and the people who are actually in the White House who are supporting this president. I understand that the lawmakers, that they, the people in Congress and the senators, they've got to keep their jobs, and they can only go so far. But listen, when you have something like this, what is going to be the breaking point? And as I said this morning on our air, on our New Day show with Chris Cuomo, if you are in the White House and you are a member of this administration and you are supporting and you continue support what this president is doing, you're also supporting racism tacitly. And so I do believe that. I don't think that the bulk of the Republican Party is going to change. I agree with Jeffrey Toobin. But those people who are in the White House to back someone who came out yesterday and said what he said, I think is just an abdication of duty, and it's un-American. You think, David Shelley, anybody's going to quit? Anybody in the White House is going to resign?
I don't know. We'll wait and see. That's a fine question to ask, whether or not people who are working in the inner circle of Trump's closest advisors, if they feel they can no longer work for him, totally valid question to ask. Even if they quit, this is where I think, I don't think anybody here is predicting change. I think we're trying to expose what is unacceptable. And so if these advisors want to stay, they should be called out and exposed for doing so. But I don't think anybody here expects
Everybody stand
change.
by. There's more breaking news we're following. We'll have much more on President Trump's reaction to the violence in Charlottesville, the backlash over his response as well.
You had a lot of people in that group that were there to innocently protest and very legally protest because, I don't know if you know, they had a permit. The other group didn't have a permit.
With the country and his own administration reeling from President Trump's shocking remarks about the Charlottesville, Virginia violence. Sources tell CNN that the president is, quote, without regret. We're back with Democratic Congressman Andre Carson of Indiana. He's a member of the House Intelligence Committee. Congressman, I want to share with you and our viewers a note I received last night from the former CIA Director John Brennan right after our show. And let me put the words up on the screen. Wolf, just watched your interview with Senator Blumenthal when you mentioned that you lost all 4 of your grandparents to the unspeakable evil of Nazism. I just want to extend my sympathies not only for their deaths, but also to you and your family and countless others for the pain inflicted today by the despicable words of Donald Trump. Mr. Trump's words and the beliefs they reflect are a national disgrace, and all Americans of conscience need to repudiate his ugly and dangerous comments. If allowed to continue along this senseless path, Mr. Trump will do lasting harm to American society and to our standing in the world. By his words and his actions, Mr. Trump is putting our national security and our collective futures at grave risk. Signed, John Brennan. Very, very powerful words. As a member of the Intelligence Committee, do you agree that the national security of the United States is now at risk?
I think in many ways, yes. I mean, considering the fact that some of his strongest supporters are anti-Semitic, and you know what your family has had to endure. And I think, globally speaking, I think that he has promoted himself to be a decisive leader. He promoted himself to be a bold leader, but it's clear that he is riddled with indecision, and his impulsivity, as I've said before, has in a way crippled his ability to garner the kind of support, to boost morale in the administration. I mean, I talk to folks in the State Department quite often, talk about how the internal controls really aren't there and how morale is low and how they're understaffed and they're not getting the kind of support that's so necessary from the top. And so I think as it relates to intel, he has been too cozy to Vladimir Putin. I think that coziness has caused unease with the global community, many of our Five Eyes partners, and I think that his way of lashing out, not being diplomatic, he thinks he's being bold, he loves being provocative, but that kind of provocation has limits, Wolf, and I think Director Brennan, he's right. He's a veteran. He's skilled. I have great respect for him. I've worked with him. He sits on a panel. He has sat on a panel with me and Congressman Terry Sewell of Alabama in terms of recruiting more minorities in the IC space. And I think his instincts are right.
Are you surprised that a career intelligence professional like John Brennan would feel the need to weigh in on this specific issue in those very strong words at this point?
You know, Director Brennan is a man of very few words. He's very wise, but I think for someone like him to come out and show support you and your family and empathize, but also to make that kind of statement, it shows that he and others are concerned about the preservation of our democracy.
What can you and other lawmakers, congressmen, do to counteract this potential threat?
I think that you know, the blessing is that you have committees like the Armed Services Committee, Transportation and Infrastructure, and of course Intelligence. There are others who are probably some of the most bipartisan committees on the Hill. And the beauty lies in our ability to reach across the aisle and agree on national security issues, agree on infrastructure issues. These are universal issues. These are issues that Democrats and Republicans generally agree on. I think the blessing is that we have a separate but equal branch of government where we can put aside our differences, put aside this petty dialogue about dismantling the Affordable Care Act, and get to the real work of job creation and protecting Americans.
Congressman Andre Carson, thanks so much for joining us.
Always a pleasure. Thank you, Wolf.
Thank you. And this important note to our viewers, we did reach out to Republican leaders throughout the day. They all, at least for now, they refused to join us, but the invitation is clearly still very much open. We have much more coming up on the breaking news.
Now says the August Obamacare subsidy payments to insurance companies will indeed be made. We've just gotten that in. Let's go to our senior congressional correspondent, Maddow Raju, in Washington with more. Maddow, what's the deal?
Yeah, that's right. In fact, the White House had been threatening that they would not actually make these payments to insurers in order to defray those costs that the insurers incur and to subsidize health coverage. Now, what the Trump administration is saying is that they will move forward with their August payments. Now, the one reason why, Brooke, they're moving forward in this is because of a new analysis from the Congressional Budget Office suggesting that ending these payments would dramatically lead to an increase in premiums, up to 20% increase in premiums. Now, also, at the same time, doing so could potentially increase the budget deficit, and as well as that it could lead to fewer people having coverage. Now, the reason why the White House had been threatening not moving forward with these payments is because we've heard President Trump say time and again that he wants Obamacare to collapse. And one way to do that is to not allow these payments to go forward. But by not allowing these payments to go forward, it could really upend the individual insurance market and create chaos in the system. So right now, the White House is saying they will move forward. It will still add pressure, Brooke, on both Republicans and Democrats in the Senate to come up with a deal as soon as next month and try to fix this ongoing problem. To see if they can at least not repeal Obamacare, but fix some elements in the individual insurance market. But right now, the White House is at least saying they're moving forward with these payments in order to prevent any further turmoil that we've seen from insurers pulling out in various states here.
Maddow, thank you. Maddow Raju in Washington. Let's go back, though, to the story that is Charlottesville, Virginia. I've got two CNN political analysts, Carl Bernstein, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and author, and Joshua Green, author of Devil's Bargain. Guys, good to see you both. Carl Bernstein, to you, you say the president is in free fall. How do you mean?
Well, he may be in free fall, and the question is whether he has any parachutes left, and if he does, can he land anywhere soft enough beyond his base? Because right now the issue is before the country as it never has been, in the Congress, especially among Republicans, in the military, in the intelligence community, where large numbers of leaders believe he is not fit to be the president of the United States. And this is happening at the same time that he's under investigation by a special prosecutor who's closing in on him and his family. So it's a dangerous moment in American history. I've never seen such a moment, really, of peril in terms of the presidency, including in Watergate. We don't know how Trump reacts to things, not well and not usually with an idea of what's good for the whole country. And what we're seeing for the first time is that members of Congress who are Republicans are saying to each other, he is unfit and we have to do something about it.
But
will they become public?
They're saying it to each other.
Yeah, but
it's the Senate Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell, told Manu, or actually didn't tell Manu, a source told Manu that Mitch McConnell is privately upset over how the president's handling this.
It's more than upset. It's more than upset.
But he's private about it.
Yeah, but
should he do more?
Look, I can't tell those guys what to do.
I know
and
you can't,
at the same time, they know that they're on shaky moral ground with this president, and they're abandoning him. The question is, how are they going to abandon him? They understand that the constituencies that they need, beyond Donald Trump's base, are coming together in a consensus that this president is not fit to be the president of the United States, not ethically, not morally, and not in terms of being able to lead the country in a way that unites it and defends the Constitution, the people, and the defense of the United States itself. This is a crisis, and it's being recognized, and the military leaders particularly are aware of this. They're talking to each other about it. There's not going to be a coup, but the idea, and let's say that very strongly, nobody's going to have a coup. This is not about a deep state. This is about a consensus developing that the president of the United States is unfit. We've never been here. It's different than Nixon, and it's dangerous.
Josh Green, what about his inner circle? You know, these are neo-Nazis that we're talking about, and we know that Gary Cohn and Steve Mnuchin are both Jewish. Stood behind him yesterday. Gary Cohn, latest CNN reporting is that he is enraged and has been embarrassed. This has been devastating. Does he resign? Should he resign?
Well, that's a decision that he has to make. And until these kinds of things are said publicly, until these senior officials come out and say this or resign on principle, which people have done in the past, which people did during Watergate, I don't think it really counts. I mean, you know, leaking to reporters that you're unhappy is a pretty gutless way of expressing your opinion on something as serious as this. I think the decision that people like that have to make is, at what point does this become untenable? At what point is my own reputation so tarnished by my association with Trump and what he's saying that I feel that I need to leave?
Talking to Doug High a second ago, proud Republican, who was basically saying, I don't know if I want Gary Cohn to the world to resign, because who does that then leave us with in the White House? We don't know who the president would replace these people with.
Look, the real thing is Donald Trump is president of the United States. He's been governing the country, and he's been governing the White House in his own image and the way he wants to. And it doesn't much matter who's there. He's not capable of being restrained, as we can see. He's not capable of taking constructive advice. And he is who he is and always has been. I think that's one of the things that's evolving in this consensus, that he was perhaps able, through some very smart campaigning and recognizing some things about the conditions of our country that Hillary Clinton did not. He is the legitimate president of the United States, but that does not protect him when he says things like he has now said to reveal who he really is. And now those who have backed him, who are not his base, have to do something about it, and I think they're coming to a realization of that. Remember, and this is different than Watergate. In Watergate, we had a criminal president of the United States. This goes beyond criminality. What is evolving in the consensus is a view that the president is not competent, that he's not ethical, that he is not capable of being the president. This is a very different, dangerous situation, and believe me, this discussion that we're talking about is taking place. How rapidly it will evolve in terms of people publicly stating the things they're saying to us. And this is a real challenge for journalists, because we in the journalistic community ought to be going to the military leaders, to the congressional Republicans, to the business leaders, and saying, on background, they're not going to say it for the record. Try to get them to say it for the record. Look, I could be wrong. Maybe it's not as pervasive as my reporting would indicate, but I trust my reporting. And I think what we need to be doing as reporters is asking the people we cover, what is going on here? What are you prepared to do? What do you think is happening? Is this man fit to be the president of the United States? As you are saying in private, he's not.
I know you want to jump in.
Two points here, though. One is the business community, interestingly, did stand up and publicly rebuke the president and take steps that people like Gary Cohn and Stephen Mnuchin have so far not seen fit to do. I think that's important for two reasons. One, just as a statement of principle, but two, Trump's appeal, Trump's political appeal beyond just his base of hardcore nationalists was to independents and even to Democrats who believe this is a business guy who can run the government, who can create jobs. The symbolism of these two councils disbanding in disgust at Trump's failure to call out white supremacy, I think is a potentially mortal blow to this image of Trump as a business guy who can run the country in a way that politicians cannot.
I think the fact that we're using the word mortality is really
I have 30 seconds left, and let me just ask you, Josh, on Jared and Ivanka. This is, again, we talk about palace intrigue, again, another massive blow-up where they're MIA.
Amazingly, they're on vacation.
They're on vacation.
You can go back and look at a couple critical points. One that I covered in the book was when Paul Manafort blew up. They were actually yachting David Geffen in Croatia at the time. So they often seem to be missing and on vacation during these critical moments. And you wonder if they were here and present and able to exert a little bit of their influence if things might not have gotten quite as out of control as they did yesterday.
The line from the CNN reporting, Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner vacationing in Vermont have communicated with the president, period. We got to go. Josh Green, Carl Bernstein, thank you both so much. Coming up next, you talked about the business advisory councils there. President Trump disbanding both of his business advisory councils today. Jake Tapper is standing by. He's going to take over for us from Washington momentarily. Stay with CNN. While many Republicans have spoken to condemn Nazis and white supremacists, very few have actually taken it a step further and called out President Trump by name. Florida Senator Marco Rubio is one of the few tweeting out, Mr. President, you can't allow white supremacists to share only part of the blame. He then went on to quote scripture, posting this passage from Proverbs, tweeting, the violent deceive their neighbors and feed them into a way that is not good. With me now, Pastor Joshua Dubois, former religious affairs director in the Obama White House. Sir, it is always nice to have you on. How are you,
Great
Joshua?
to be with you, Brooke. Thanks for having me.
So I realize you probably don't have President Obama on speed dial. That said, where do you think, just knowing him, where do you think his head is, or the former First Lady, in all of this?
Yeah, listen, I can't speak for the former president or former First Lady Michelle Obama, but I can say that they have showed us an example of what moral leadership looks like. After the massacre at Mother Emanuel in Charleston, President Obama could have shied away. He could have avoided the big issues of race and hate and American history that were provoked. But instead, he went down to Charleston. And, I was there in the audience sitting behind the families as he gave that speech about American history and amazing grace, standing just a few feet above the coffin of Reverend Clemente Pinckney. This is a president, a former president, who has led in a moral way and engaged the tough moral issues of this time. But unfortunately, in the memorial service that we had just recently after Charleston, President Trump wasn't there. And the reason he wasn't there was because he did not lead in a moral way. He did not draw clear moral lines. And I think that's a shame.
I just want to share with everyone on President Obama. He hasn't said anything today specifically. We know Bush 41 and 43 have, but he did tweet this whole massive Nelson Mandela quote. We can throw it up on the screen just so you can see, everyone can see just a piece of it. This is apparently now the #1 liked tweet ever. That said, Joshua, wow. Just last month, a picture circulated on Twitter of faith leaders laying hands on the president in prayer with the caption, such an honor to pray within the Oval Office for the President of the United States and Vice President. My question is, you have these evangelical leaders in the country who have these, very important voices who have supported, endorsed the president. What do they say to him now?
Well, we need them to show moral courage. And, it's a shame when the president's, now former manufacturing and business advisors are showing more morality and moral courage than the president's faith advisors. We did see some of them write a letter, speaking against racism and white supremacy, but have they directly confronted this president and made it clear that his actions, his normalization of Nazism and white supremacy are wrong? I have not seen them do that. And so at minimum, they should catch up to the manufacturing advisors, but we really need them to speak with a clear voice and make it clear that, particularly in an evangelical community that sanctions slavery and Jim Crow and so forth, that this is a new day in American evangelicalism. That hasn't happened yet. And Brooke, in general,
Joshua, you are a father?
Yes, that's right.
I don't know how old they are, but
I have my son will turn 2 next week, actually. So we're in party planning mode right now.
Okay, well, never mind. Then it's not like you would have had a conversation with a 2-year-old over what's happening. I just keep thinking about parents in this country and the conversations they're having with their little ones. But we'll save that conversation for when he or she gets a little bit bigger. Joshua Dubois, always a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you. Coming up next, Baltimore becomes the latest city to take down Confederate statues in the wake of the deadly Charlottesville rally. Just in to CNN, President Trump is moving forward, quote, without regret, after his extraordinary news conference in the lobby of Trump Tower. CNN's Sarah Morey joins us with some new details, including strong reaction from the president's top economic advisor, Gary Cohn. Sarah, what have you learned?
Well, Brooke, obviously the president has been facing backlash from members of his own party, from former presidents, from Wall Street executives who are fleeing his company, but he is moving forward without regret. Sources are telling my colleague Jeff Zeleny that the president does not regret at all the comments that he made, that he frankly feels defiant in the face of all of this criticism. Now, he really is looking at the reactions playing out and basically sees it as hyperventilating from a bunch of East Coast liberals and the media, who the president has made very clear he basically views as his opposition. And this is kind of the mindset that he was in throughout the presidential campaign, certainly at the end when he was under fire, when the polls showed him behind, and he went on, of course, to win the presidency. That is kind of where his mind is at. But, of course, there are tensions amid the people who have to work for him. Not all staffers are of the same mindset of the president. And one person who is certainly not of that mindset is Gary Cohn, the president's top economic advisor. We're told that he was enraged to be by the president's side as he was making those comments at Trump Tower yesterday. Remember, this was supposed to be an infrastructure event. That's what went off the rails. And since then, he's just been embarrassed. He's been disappointed. One of his associates said it wouldn't be a surprise if he does contemplate quitting. But of course, Cohn has had his eye on jobs bigger than the one he has now, possibly being the next Fed chair. These are the things that people are weighing as they're deciding, look, should I jump ship in the administration or can I hold out? Is there still more work for me to do here? Is it worth it?
Sarah, thank you. Let's discuss a little bit more. Democratic Congressman Hakeem Jeffries here of New York, who is calling for 2 streets named after Confederate generals to be renamed. It was behind a bill to remove Confederate flags from government buildings. Congressman, nice to see you. Thanks for rolling through CNN.
Good to see you.
Before we get to all of that, just to what Sarah just reported, that the word from the White House is that after that extraordinary news conference, the president has no regrets. Where are you on all of this?
Well, what Donald Trump did was rip the sheets off and show the American people who he is and what he represents. It's shocking for a lot of people, but